Dan Price, he's the CEO of Gravity Payments. And a few years ago, he made headlines when he cut his own CEO salary from $1 million down to $70,000. Now, why did he do this? Well, he did this so he could raise every single one of his employees' salary up to that same $70K benchmark. What was the result? Well, one of the things that happened was his company tripled its revenue. The other thing that happened is he doesn't have to work very hard to retain people or recruit people. But in today's video, I'm going to tell you the one interview question he asks every single person who interviews with his company, and I'm going to show you how to answer it. Let's go. Hey everybody, I'm Ben from Ben Talks Talent. I've got 12 years experience in interviewing, hiring, and recruiting, and I'm passionate about using my experience to help you become the best candidate possible, maximize your career. In today's video, we're gonna be talking about something really cool. The recruiting nerd in me is very interested in this topic because it is a cool, unique interview question. It's one that CEO Dan Price, CEO of Gravity Payments, who is recently pretty famous, uses in every single one of his interviews. I'm gonna tell you what that question is, and I'm gonna show you how to answer it. But before we do that, before we get into the main topic of the video, if you are new here, do me a favor, take 3 seconds, subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit that notification bell. That way, every week, you get 2 to 3 videos that are all free and designed to help you become a better interviewer. And if you were not new, well, hey, welcome back. All right, with that out of the way, let's get into the video. Now let's start with a question. The question is, tell me about a time that you didn't live up to your own standards. That's the base of it. Sometimes you'll see that it's followed up by, and then what did you do after that to modify your behavior going forward? But basically what this is it's a chance for the person talking to you to establish, does this person set goals for themselves? Are those goals high for themselves? Let me find out at a time where they didn't hit those goals, and let me see what they did to modify their behavior moving forward. That's kind of the why. They want to learn about you, learn about what makes you tick, and then kind of understand what happens when you don't hit the goals that you set out for yourself. So it's pretty self-explanatory, right? You know, think of yourself as a hiring manager, put yourself in their shoes. That is all very valuable information. It basically talks about how you react to adversity, how you set your goals, standards, the line at which you hope to live up to, and then when you don't do that, how do you respond? That is why they ask that. Now, when you're answering this question, there are about 4 different things I think you need to accomplish to do that successfully. So I'm gonna walk through all 4 of those right now, tell you what each one of those tips are, and then I'm gonna give you an example of how I would answer it. So stick around to the end of this video because I'm actually gonna lay it out. I'm not just gonna tell you how, but I'm going to answer it for you in a way that makes sense so that you can use that as a format going forward. So let's get into the individual steps you need to answer this question correctly. Now, the first one is authenticity, right? Someone that is asking you this question, it's a chance for you to be vulnerable and tell them, you know what? This was something I had to do. I didn't live up to the standards I set for myself, and that was disappointing, right? So don't just give some BS answer. Don't say something that you know is kind of a cop-out, right? This needs to be something real, something that happened, and something where you aren't happy with how you performed. And then you need to talk about what you did differently. So my first step here is be vulnerable and honest. The second step would be use the half method. So the half method is something that I advise people to do when it's talking about a mistake you made or an error or something you did in the past where you failed. And basically what that is to take your career, chop it in half, and have the example come from the first half. Although you want to be vulnerable, I always still think it's beneficial to put some distance between yourself and the mistake. The 2 rules I have for talking about a time where you messed up is it can't be something where the sin is too significant, right? It can't be like, well, I used to have a theft issue. I didn't live up to my standards because I was stealing, and now I don't do that. You know, don't want to do something like that. It's got to be a reasonable mistake that anybody could reasonably make. And then you want to make it in the first half of your career. Now, the third step is talk about how grateful you are for the experience, right? Anytime you're talking about a mistake you made in the past or a time you didn't live up to your standards, you want to embrace that and you want to view it in the best way possible. Like, yes, did I fall short? Absolutely. But I'm grateful for that because I am better now. It was a lesson that was hard learned, but I learned it. You know, I lost in the moment, but I didn't lose the lesson. And this is why I am better for it. So talk about how you were grateful for the mistake and talk about how you are made better because of it. Now, the last thing I want you to talk about here, and the last key to answering this in just a perfect way, is you need to be detailed. One of the mistakes candidates make frequently is they give examples where there is not a lot of detail. They are very vague. They are nebulous when they are answering the interview question. And I gotta tell you, I can't tell you how many times a hiring manager said to me, you know, Ben, we asked some questions, but they barely gave any detail. It made me feel like they were making up the answers. You don't want them to think that. So remember, whenever you are giving an example, you want to have adequate detail. You want to make sure that you are going into some of the specifics that are relevant to the story. Now, you don't need to lay out everything. You don't need to give them details on every single component of the story. But if you breeze through it and you don't give any significant amount of detail, one of two things is going to happen. They're going to think that A, you are making it up, or B, that you were just going through it real quick and it wasn't a significant thing and you're just kind of glazing over. Neither one of those things are really good. You want to make sure you're providing them with adequate detail so they can feel good about the specific level that you went into it. So remember, last kind of tip here before we get into the actual example, make sure you're giving appropriate detail. Now I'm going to give you an example of how to answer this. Now I'm going to answer it as a recruiter, right? I think it's going to be easy for you to hear this and go, okay, here are the variables I could switch out. Instead of candidates, maybe it's sales number, or instead of candidates, maybe it's a procurement related thing or an engineering related thing. But I'm going to give you an example as a recruiter, and then I want you to take the same approach but swap out the variables. So this is the specific example I'm going to give you. I'm going to answer it if I was a candidate. Wow, that was a really good question. You know, looking back on my career, I can think of a pretty specific example of a time when I didn't live up to my own standards. I was recruiting on a really important role, and it was a lead product designer. And I had been working on this role for about 5 weeks, and I had sourced a bunch of candidates. I had interviewed a handful of candidates, and I had one really good candidate. And I had set this candidate up with an interview with my hiring manager, and I thought I was good to go. I thought to myself, this candidate is absolutely the candidate. It is a perfect match. And then I kind of stopped recruiting. I kind of took my foot off the gas because I was so sure it was going to be a success. Well, it turns out that candidate did not end up taking the job. That candidate got a counteroffer from their employer and they ended up not being a fit. But because I had taken my foot off the gas, I didn't have any secondary candidates. I didn't have a backup candidate or a candidate behind that. And it was almost like I had to start over from scratch. And that was really hard. It put me in a bad position, and it's not the type of recruiter I wanted to be or the standard that I set for myself in terms of the daily excellence that I try to turn in. That was really valuable for me. And although that was really hard in the moment, I appreciate that it was valuable because now, whenever I'm recruiting for a position, no matter how sure I am that I've identified the good candidate, I make sure that I get a backup candidate and a secondary backup candidate so that even if candidate number one decides this offer is not for them, I feel really good about the activity I have behind that. There you go. So that's a recruiting example. Again, the candidates, the timelines, the repercussions for the actions, those are just variables. So swap in what makes sense for your industry. But everything I said in terms of my thought process, the activity, the foot off the gas, and then the repercussions to my actions, those could all be applicable in a variety of industries. So just make it your own. There you go. That's everything you needed. Again, if you practice this, if you're ready for this, you can absolutely crush this interview question and position yourself as a really solid candidate. Good luck in your next interview. You got this.